Yes, hello once again. Welcome back to your number one and favourite classic dirt bike TV channel, where we check out more of those old school vintage dirt bikes from way back in the day. Now, apparently my videos are now watched all over the globe, and I've been getting some very good feedback from countries all over the world, especially to all you people over there in the USA and in Canada, because apparently my video channel is quite popular over there across the pond. So hello to all my USA subscribers and Canadian viewers. So I hope you continue to enjoy my video content with regards looking at these old vintage race bikes. So coming up now, if you're a Husqvarna fan, then you may enjoy this next feature that I'm going to show you. Now, this particular bike is a machine that was never really a motocross bike at all, but it was built using two donor machines, and all put together by Scotsman Brian Allardyce. So without any further delay, let's jump straight into this video and take a look at Brian's 1982 430CR Husqvarna. And so, as I said, this quite nice looking 82 430CR Husqvarna wasn't really a bike at all originally. That was of course until its owner and builder, Brian Allardyce from Angus in Perthshire, Scotland, decided that he needed a winter bike build project that could keep him busy through the closed winter racing season. And this particular 430CR was actually made up from two older scrap bikes that Brian had lying around in his workshop. Now, we've already featured one of Brian's bikes here on Classic Dirt Bike TV, and if you're a regular visitor to my channel, you may remember that we showcased Brian's superb 1981 KTM 495 not so long ago, and it looks like Brian's done another fantastic job on this Twinshock Husky rebuild. Now, Brian already has his 495 KTM and a couple of Micos that he races regularly, but when he decided on this latest bike build project, he was looking for something just a little bit different from the run-of-the-mill Micos that were going around, and so Brian then decided to build a brand new Husqvarna using the two donor bikes that he already had in his workshop. And his plan was to use as many parts as possible from both of the bikes to build this new 430 Twinshocker. And so the two donor bikes that were going to be cannibalised for their spare parts were a 1982 250 CR and this 1982 430 CR Enduro bike. Now, both of these machines at the time were non-runners, and they hadn't seen the light of day for many a year, and as you can see here, they were in a pretty dire state. But that didn't make too much difference to Brian, because every part on both of these bikes was going to be stripped and reconditioned before becoming a component on the new 430 Husqvarna machine. So anyhow, the plan was to use the 430 power plant from the 82 Enduro bike, and then use the frame and the front and rear suspension from this 250 CR. And so, just to start the project, Brian stripped everything off both of the donor bikes, and then he jet washed all of the parts, and then decided what could be saved and what was just basically scrap, as many of the components were now 40 years old on both of these bikes, so there wasn't a lot of parts that were going to be saved. Now, the frame was inspected and was found to have some damage and cracks from its previous life on the racetrack, so Brian then did all of the necessary repairs and then sent the chassis to his local paint shop for blasting and repainting. And when it returned, I must say it all looked as good as new once again, and ready to accept its donor 430 Husqvarna motor. So when it came to the initial inspection of the Husky 430 engine, it revealed it had a severely damaged crankcase on the generator side of the engine, and the kickstart gear at the back of the clutch was also damaged. And as you already know, these Husky engine casings are not that easy to source these days, but it just so happens that Brian did manage to track down a replacement casing and kickstart gear from a local dealer who just happened to have a spare casing and gear train in his old spare parts department. But once again, the motor was treated to a full strip down and rebuild with all new seals, bearings and gaskets, and naturally it was also treated to a complete rebore and a new crank and conrod kit and a new piston. But there were a lot of parts on this 430 motor that just couldn't be used and had to be replaced, but thankfully Brian managed to source almost everything he needed from Husqvarna parts suppliers Andy Elliott at HVA Factory. Because as you know, HVA Factory are a very good supplier of these old Husqvarna parts. Now, other parts on the engine, like the 430 motor's original Mikuni carburetor, was once more given a full vapor blast and clean before then bolting it back on to the reed valve block once again. Now, once more, and as you'd expect, the original exhaust system on the 430 donor bike was just basically rotten to the core after 40 years of age and lying around not being used. And so Brian again had to source a brand new replacement where Andy Elliott again at HVA Factory came up trumps and supplied him with this new expansion chamber. Now, the old tailpipe was also in a bad way, as you'd expect, and was certainly of no use whatsoever on this brand new bike build. And once more, a new replacement was located and then fitted to the new exhaust system. And we'll be able to have a listen to the bark from this tailpipe shortly when Brian fires up that 430 Husqvarna motor. So at the end of the day, it's probably pretty fair to say that this 430 enduro bike engine from the donor machine was given the full strip down and rebuild process, and every single part that didn't measure up during inspection was replaced with brand new components. So essentially what we have here now is an almost brand new 430 two-stroke Husky engine that's now good and ready to go. Now, the bike's front forks that are now fitted to our 430 are of course the suspension units taken from the old 250 donor bike, and again these were completely stripped down, and brand new damper rods, seals and oil were all replaced before being bolted back on to the front of the chassis. Now, Brian decided not to paint the lower fork stanchions, as these tended to suffer a lot of damage from stones and other debris on the track, which would chip away any kind of new paintwork that was attached to them, but they still look okay and superb in their bare alloy colour scheme. Now, the bike's front and rear brake hubs again were completely refurbished and new brake shoes replaced before then repainting both of the hubs and brake backplates. But for an old school 1982 Swedish Twinshocker, these older Huskies still had decent brakes, and they certainly coped well when they were needed to either stop the bike or slow it down to make a quick turn. Now, Brian's original plan was to still use both of the wheels from the 250 donor bike, but these were just too far gone to be reused on a new bike build, and so a replacement pair of alloy XL rims were then purchased, and they were sent to a local wheel builders to be laced onto the refurbished hubs with, of course, heavy-duty stainless steel spokes. And so as we move on to the rear of the bike, now again these rear shocks are the suspension units that came from the old 250 Husky bike, and these were sent to Paul Chiappa at Dunfermline Motorcycles, where he repaired and serviced these Öhlins shocks with brand new seal blocks and oil, and he also refilled the piggyback reservoirs with brand new gas. And to finish off the shocks, those dual rate suspension springs were given a brand new fresh coat of paint as well. And so when it came to the refurbishment of the Husky's fuel cell, now Brian said that this was just a complete nightmare to do, as it felt like the tank had over 100 layers of paint stuck on it, and he said it took him absolutely ages to remove it all back to bare metal once again. But when that was all completed, he then set about taking out any of the dings or dents that were visible on the tank, and he then passed it on to his local coach building and paint shop, where they did all of the necessary intricate painting, which Brian said he was delighted with when he bolted it back onto the chassis. Now, when it came to the refurbishment of the bike seat, now Brian had bought a brand new seat base for the bike, but he wasn't really happy with its quality and the way that it fitted onto the chassis, so he then refurbished the old original part and then bought a new foam insert and top cover to finish off this particular part of the bike's build. Now, naturally, and once again, all of the bike's plastics are all brand new replacement items on this 430 machine, and these plastic parts are still readily available for these Huskies at outlets like HVA Factory, and there's certainly no shortage of suppliers when it comes to sourcing graphics, as well as there are now plenty companies out there supplying these plastics and motorcycle graphics services. And so in the bike's controls department, Brian fitted a period set of motocross handlebars to his new bike, but when he first tried them for size, he thought that the riding height was just too high for his 6 foot plus stature, and so he then used a pair of shortened handlebar mounts to solve that particular issue. And once again, a good set of Magura levers and their associated covers, of course, and a decent quality Swedish Gunnar Gasser throttle twist grip to control all of that power from the big 430 reed valve two-stroke motor. Now, Brian did tell me that after the bike was completed and then fueled up, that it only took a couple of stabs on that Husky Kickstarter to fire it into life. And although it fired up quite easily, there was still a very strange misfire occurring somewhere around the motor. Now, initial checks of the carburetor and spark plug proved that they weren't the culprit, although it was eventually then traced to a faulty ignition connection. Although considering this 1982 430 was never really a bike at all at one point and is the result of making one machine out of two old donor bikes, I have to say that Brian's made another cracking rebuild of this machine, just as he did in a previous video when he restored his 81 495 KTM. Okay, so we've had a look around this bike, so let's just get Brian to fire her up and let's all have a listen to what she sounds like. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. Something for all you Husqvarna fans out there. A nice 1982 430CR Twinshocker, a bike that was put together by Scotsman Brian Allardyce using a couple of old donor Husky machines. Now, pretty soon we'll be out and about once again, and we'll be heading to round 3 of the Scottish Classic Motorcycle Racing Championships at Straven on the 5th of June, and then just a couple of weeks later we'll be heading to the south of Scotland, to Dumfries to be exact, to cover a 3-day classic motocross race event at the fantastic Drumlandrig Castle, and you can see all of the bikes and all of the racing from that full 3-day event here on my channel soon after. But coming up next on CDB TV, we're going to take a look at another couple of nice machines that were at the 2022 Telford Classic Dirt Bike Show, and we'll be taking a look at these lovely Rickman Matisse machines, and these bikes of course are British made, and the Rickman Matisse company did have a stand at the show during that 2-day event in February this year. So we'll be taking a look at these lovely Rickman Matisse bikes when we return to my channel. But until then, of course, everybody watch what you're doing out there with those old classic dirt bikes, and I want you back here safe and sound so we can talk about more vintage iron right here on your #1 and favourite classic dirt bike TV channel.